We're good. Sweet. So last recording was a little bit rushed. I kind of reviewed it, and man, I did not realize how many times I say of course. But didn't want to rob you of some of the stuff that I went over really quickly, and it didn't make a lot of sense because I didn't have a complete model, right? So it was a bit difficult to get some ideas across. So maybe kind of a part 2 of part 3. So we'll just call it part 4. However, let me get my downloads. Thank you again, Allegra. So I think we've covered, honestly, the 2D stuff pretty well, and for the most part, shouldn't be an issue of obviously taking two-dimensional lines into Illustrator. I think a lot of us have had practice with that, of course, in the exercise. Now, just by a show of hands, how many of you guys have started modeling your observation tower? So a good majority of us, right? And this would definitely be at least more concentrated for these guys. Obviously, we're going to talk a majority of the 3D model stuff. However, eventually I'll take it into composition, and we will need that also, right? Really the same kind of compositional things for everybody, so not a big deal there. I'll get rid of some of the stuff that just doesn't seem like we need it right now. And let's go ahead and put that in some sort of shaded view. But yeah, this is great because, well, it's a nice point to take a look and go, well, okay, sweet, model's done, right? We can click on certain items. I don't know if I've actually brought this up before, but it works in Revit as well. If you click on an item and start spinning, it'll basically center onto that object, and that can be really helpful, right? I don't know about you guys, but if you don't have anything clicked and you kind of just float around, well, it goes to the last shape that you clicked on, so that's kind of nice. But anyway, so let's make a 2-point perspective, and actually in our case, there might be one actually already even in there, but let's go ahead and make a new one. I mentioned that you could probably get into the exploded axon. Now that I remember that I was having that conversation with somebody, the axon from last time can be replaced for, say, a new axon. I will allow that, right? Just because I know some of y'all have some pretty complex models and you definitely want to start to explode things. Maybe the windows come out, maybe the structure comes out, and it could really make a great diagram. However, I'm not going to make it a requirement. That's definitely the level of drawing that starts to take it into the A level. So not really the point of what we're trying to get at. Again, we're trying to focus on the graphic communication component of it. Anyway, so let's set up some views first, just kind of a recap. We're going to go to set view. We're going to go to name views. It's already locked in for me, so it's somewhere in here. It's not that one. I'm just going to click on it again. I can't memorize all these icons. I don't expect you to either. Sometimes you just got to unhit it, hit it again. There it is. Beautiful. And it looks like nothing there yet. Let's make this a little bigger. Where's my camera views? That might have been it. Sweet. That is my camera view. So let's go ahead and set this up. Again, a fresh reminder from last time, we're going to need our camera. Let's go ahead and maybe set up our 2-point and 1-point perspectives. So I might need all 4 views for this. Keep in mind I could dial it in a little bit, right? Maybe get a top view. That's looking pretty sweet. I want to go for something a little bit more dramatic than that. So I'm going to take the center point so I can move it a little closer. And then I'm going to widen the angle because nothing says drama like a wide angle lens. Am I right? However, we don't want to go too much. Obviously too much will really start to make it look unreal. I think something like that is pretty safe. It's slightly exaggerated, but not so much that you can't tell what it is. And it's looking pretty good so far. Obviously I can start to tell where some of my vanishing points are going to go. You can kind of start to see those, right? Looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and save it. We'll call that one the 2-point. And I don't want a snapshot. Obviously I got the wrong one here. And let's just flip through until we got the right one. I can't find it. Let's try again. It says it's toggled, but it's not. And that's okay, you might run into the same problem, and what do you know, I clicked on it again, brought it right back up. Very good. So we'll go ahead and hit the plus sign, try again, 2-point perspective. Of course, make sure you're in the right window like myself. 2-point perspective. Sweet. Now if I accidentally change it, of course I can double click on it and get that right back, just as we learned last time when we were kind of briefly talking about the rendered and how we would get some of the calculated shade and shadow of these elements. Again, I would say use a spotlight. It's just a little bit easier to handle, it's a little easier to work with. And let's face it, if you have Rhino 8, the sun will work really well. However, Rhino 6, the sun is a little less able to be manipulated. So spotlight is definitely a good choice. So let's go ahead and do that. And secondly, I do want a 1-point perspective. That's looking pretty cool. However, as you can see, it's pretty hard to kind of dial in something there, so I might have to zoom into the model itself, maybe get really in there and change that point. Again, what's nice is just understanding all those points. I'm gonna pull it back a little bit. It's a pretty sweet moment, except eventually you can be in the wall. So we're gonna definitely have to use a wide angle lens for this. It looks like my points are showing up somewhere out there. Well, I can change the angle, that's pretty cool. Not what I wanted though. There it is. Oh, too much. Go. Not sure why Gumball's not coming up on my, oh there it is. Sweet. So obviously I want a wide angle lens. Except I don't want to go too much, right? I don't want to do something that's like so ridiculous you can't even tell what it is, or it's no longer really coherent. So be very careful. In our case, I could probably clip a little bit of the wall and it's not looking too crazy. But as you can see, as soon as I move it just ever so slightly, that cone is really hitting, right? But that's looking pretty good. I'd probably raise the camera a little bit, so just to dial it in without messing up the model. And again, those arrows really come in handy. I can get even closer to the ground and even take it up, maybe look down. That's looking pretty good though. It starts to show off the stairs a little bit and multiple levels, and maybe look outside. Maybe that's an opportunity to Photoshop something outside. Even if it is just sort of a clear sky or an urban environment, could really go a long way in terms of communicating this space. So let's get that one as well. Call it the 1-point. And that's looking pretty good. Of course, I can use the shade and shadow for just about anything. What's nice is, well, as soon as you click on that, it does change the viewport that is active, so I guess be careful with that. I'll set that back to top. And what is nice is it does label the viewport in that, so not too big of a deal. Doesn't look like I saved it though. Oh no, I gotta do it all over again. It's okay. At least it's recorded, and you of course know how to set up. It's kind of like stuck on a perspective view. Probably should have restarted my computer today. Probably. That's okay. Accidentally saved some sort of two-dimensional view, so I'll just delete that. Not a big deal. Definitely what I wanted to show you today was that when you make 2D, it shouldn't just be like a one-stop all, right? You should really still manipulate and go through the drawing to make sure that there's no unwanted items, right? It's a little bit more difficult to delete something and get rid of something in Illustrator sometimes, right? Or break that line, or chop it up, trim it, extend it, all sorts of things. You could practically make a Daft Punk song out of that. But let's go ahead and make 2D and see what we got. So as I was mentioning before, we would normally match this Make 2D with a 3D image. I'm not going to go over that again just because it's a part of part 3, but it is required if you're going through the model stage. You need to calculate and draw your shadow, right? So that means lining it up in Rhino and retracing it with a new layer that says shadow. That way you can take that layer into Illustrator and make it look just like the line drawing that is right next to it. Don't get me wrong, you'll get to hybrids, and I'll eventually show you how to render stuff really cool if you take my computer graphics, or even my D3, my D4, we eventually get into it. There's so much to learn before rendering anyway, but it is quite enticing and exciting. So let's make 2D. Boom. One thing that I forgot to mention last time was you definitely want to maintain source layers. Without that, it just comes in all as one layer. Definitely not a bad idea to group your object. You can always ungroup it, but let's face it, if you got like thousands of stairs or 1,000 of some sort of rhythmic element, you kind of want to group sometimes, and definitely easier to ungroup things than group them. We don't really need any tangent edges. Scene silhouette, nah. Viewport rectangle, that's this viewport right there. I don't know, sometimes people do want that so they can kind of frame this, the screen, but we don't need it today. We're gonna go ahead and press apply. The more complex the model, usually the longer that the Make 2D command takes. In our case, it's a quite complete model, and just like that, it's already on the floor. I love it. But this kind of brings me to a point that will be for everybody, really, is the next thing that we want to do is start to compose this thing, right? We want to start coming up with our floor plans, and to be fair, I don't like doing that in Illustrator. You might. Your Illustrator might work fantastic, but I was stuck with a 2010 MacBook Pro one time, and running Illustrator was just such a pain, right? I would draw all this stuff in AutoCAD, and then I would get to Illustrator and it would just crash, right? So don't get me wrong, Illustrator's gotten a lot better, but I prefer to work and manipulate my lines in Rhino, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone else. So that's looking pretty good. Definitely got everything there. What's nice is I didn't have to draw a single bit of it, right? However, there could be a lot of stuff there that I just maybe don't need, and that'll really be up to Allegra to maybe decide it. She definitely knows her model more than I do. So I'm going to refrain from deleting stuff, but as you can see, there's just kind of a line in the middle of the air. Obviously, we don't need that, so of course I'll delete it. But stuff like that is sometimes unseen, or it's accidentally a white line, or it's accidentally an invisible line in Illustrator, and it can become pretty confusing, to be honest. For instance, maybe I want, maybe this isn't the case for her, but in her case, it actually looks more like a glass situation, so fantastic that some of these hidden lines are there. It's going to be quite a nice drawing. I would, of course, do those lines very lightly. But for instance, I know a lot of us just have sort of straight walls. This is an opportunity to come in and go, you know what, I don't really need that line. Uh-oh, it's part of an entire group. Okay, we'll just ungroup it real quick. Sweet. And of course, delete accordingly. Not a big deal. And as you can see, that might be a little bit more difficult if I didn't group all of these things. However, as we mentioned, we need to compose this. Well, for Monday, this just needs to be on 11 by 17, so it doesn't really need to be to a scale. In fact, I just need to keep the ratio of 11 by 17, so I'm just going to do 1100, in my case feet, because it looks like it's actual size, and then 1700 feet. That way, again, I could just keep the ratio. If that didn't make sense, then you haven't been paying attention, right? Because I definitely use the ratio of paper. And let's face it, there's no true scale to a perspective. Well, arguably, it is a projection. So it doesn't need to be too big. It also doesn't need to be too small, guys, right? It's kind of a Goldilocks situation. It's just right. I really prefer to have my architecture not on the center of the page. I'm more of an asymmetrical guy. So I'd like something like that. I don't know, maybe I actually played the way that I angled the view or what have you, because there is a lot that I can do with this. So as I was mentioning, at least for Monday, what I would like to see is something, right? Whether it be just the line work of your Make 2D, whether it's you're working on that two-dimensional part and you already have all your construction lines. That's not an issue. For the digital guys who have made a model, you might need to add some stuff back, right? That starts to make this at least a little bit more coherent and realistic. One of the first things you can add is some sort of floor, right? Well, we can't necessarily do that yet because I don't know where my vanishing point, my horizon line is, any of that stuff. I mean, I could probably guess, and don't get me wrong, you can start with a guess. And you can see how accurate you are. That's kind of fun sometimes too. But what's nice is, well, you can pick two angles of your model in which you know are flat and flush, right? So, I mean, don't get me wrong, maybe Allegro is a bad choice. She's got some good angles in there, and they might not always line up to the exact same vanishing point. However, we can test that, but I can already tell, like, that's not going to go to any vanishing point except its own, right? Because it's, of course, a diagonal element. But I imagine this line right here and this line right here, I bet they converge at some point. Now, there's not a converge command, but we do know about fillet. We know about setting it to a 0 radius. We'll take one of those lines and we'll take the other. Oh, I want the other one. Take that one. Oh, but it's grouped. That's why I won't. So I gotta ungroup it. And don't get me wrong, you can be very tempted to do this. I know I have. I just select the whole thing and ungroup. Be very careful in a complex drawing like that, because again, you might want to just take your time and ungroup things as you need them. But for the sake of tutorial, I'm going to go a little faster, right? Let's get rid of that line. In my case, I'll explode it real quick. I think I accidentally made it a little too long. Well, actually I can keep it. I don't need to actually get rid of it. But this should be its own line now. It is. Wonderful. Fill it. Let's take that one and that one we just did. Voila. Man, we were pretty close. So our horizon line is actually up there. But hey, you know, it was worth a shot trying to guess. Found our horizon line. Let's see if more points line up to that very point. So fill it. Let's go ahead and get this one. Oh, it might be group 2. Oh wait, I ungrouped everything, so I shouldn't have that problem, at least for now. Let's take that one. Voila, man, look at that accuracy. It's an actual 2-point perspective. How about that, right? Now my horizon line's a little bit off, but should probably move that too. Again, this is probably the only time I would ever use near, just so I can make sure that I get the line and get it in the right spot. Immediately turning near off, it's very dangerous. I can't really say that enough. But what's nice about this is we can start to really show somebody that we built this together, sort of in a post hoc solution kind of way. But again, it does start to add more to the drawing, and I guarantee it definitely makes it a little bit more believable that you constructed it in a very careful and sophisticated way, which is definitely what you want to go for. Now, don't get me wrong, some of these lines, they might not make it, but why not? Test some things out. Let's try the fillet on that diagonal position, because it might be kind of cool to show all the different vanishing points that this thing has. I'm going to take that piece, and that looks like it's going to converge. Ooh, look at that. And what do you know? It's on the horizon. This thing is well calculated. But again, maybe not the best line to choose because it kind of goes through the drawing. I'll definitely want to consider that. I don't want to confuse people more. I want to help them out and let them know that this was constructed using a 2-point perspective, right? So that's looking pretty good. Let's get the other side. Try and get a fillet in there. Let's go with that one and that one. Obviously I'm choosing the ones on the same side, and yeah, sometimes it'll go right off the paper, right? Definitely not a big deal. And in our case, let's get my horizon line a little bit bigger so it actually see if it touches or not. Nice. Not gonna lie, it's pretty cool to see that those exact principles that you use in analog actually work. That's exactly how it's calculated, and the optics of our eyes and how we interpretate reality, it gets pretty deep. Anyway, so it's looking pretty good. Let's get the roof in there. I think that's gonna add a touch to it. I can even take an existing line that's already there, and boom, right? Now, the next thing that I would have to do, just because these lines are technically just extended, so I don't want to accidentally, I may want to choose that as a line weight and then just have this be a construction line. You guys know my favorite tool, break. Usually I line it up to the piece and then take it off. And I'll sort of do that arbitrarily. You know, maybe a little bit longer than the others. Kind of adding my Toy Story 4-ness. And making those minuscule changes. Before I moved it into Illustrator, I'd probably take all of these that I made and of course would break them all. And as you can see, as soon as I take those lines, right, it accidentally grabs the others, right? Only if I didn't break them. Now the ones I broke should actually be their own separate line. But it looks like there's actually a few lines in there. So I accidentally selected, I think, a few, but that's okay. For the sake of the tutorial, it's kind of nice to make some mistakes because you might very well run into some mistakes yourself. Another thing that could take this drawing to the next level is some scale figures, some objects. How many of you guys have heard of Pimp My Drawing? Anybody? Good. Definitely one to write down. Actually, Professor Kernodle is definitely one that, it's funny, I'm always talking about Brave Browser. He's always talking about Pimp My Drawings. I do recommend typing this into Google first. One time, I can't remember if it's Drawleans or Drawlean, but one led to a porn site, so I mean, be very careful about that. So I'm pretty sure it's just singular, Pimp My Drawing, but ever since, yeah, it's Pimp My Drawing. Be very careful though. Don't make it plural. But what's nice about this website is it has every scale figure you can think of, and they are all free. However, he does have an extended version. It comes from an architect student. My goodness, what a smart guy, right? It's even got Bernie Sanders sitting down in a chair, ever so classically. But we got trees, cars, plants, furniture, all kinds of things. Now, I'm not trying to make this a requirement, but I do want to throw it out there because of how simple it is and how nice this site is that it sets it up for us all automatically. Random fact, the guy who invented the Segway also died and perished on a Segway. It's so weird. I mean, full circle. I would have never invented the thing, but hey. We have two choices, both Illustrator file, and that may actually be like, hey, I'm supposed to put it in Illustrator, right? Be careful, right? Like I said, manipulating lines is a lot more difficult in Illustrator, not only because it's graphic capabilities, but just the way kind of stuff imports as well, whether it's a grouped object, expanded, play around with it because it is quite different when it comes to selecting something in Illustrator. Anyway, let's go ahead and take this one. I'm gonna go with, there's my downloads. We'll go with scale figure for today. And I just wanted to let you know that you could put these in here. You'll see that I downloaded the DWG, even though both of those files will go into Rhino just fine. Actually, both of those files will go into Illustrator just fine as well. They're both vector programs, so you shouldn't have an issue. However, you can actually choose either one of these, insert or import. I'm going to go with insert. It has its own command. Basically find that file, so I'm going to go to downloads, scale figure. It's going to ask us a bunch of questions. Do you want to embed it? Of course I do. There's that word again. I keep always saying of course. Anyway. Open, and as you can see, it's a giant, but kind of nice, right? Say there were some elements I didn't really want to see the pockets or so much detail on her. I could always explode her. Of course, not literally. And I could get rid of some of the features that maybe I didn't necessarily want to see or need. I mean, the backline. I mean, we don't need sexy scale figures. We just need scale figures. You know what I'm saying? So obviously we could get that to scale as well. So we can draw a line. And let's face it, I'm gonna have to kind of guess a little bit. I shrunk my drawing. You know, I might have to fake it till I make it. I can either do scale or just use gumball, hold shift, and could even put it back together and group it. That way I didn't miss any of those meticulous lines. But you should find a point where it looks right. I mean, usually I gravitate towards a door of some kind. She's gonna look a little taller since she's on a scooter. So again, trying to stay in this horizontal, right? You'll notice if I go towards the back, right, she looks like a giant again. Kind of weird. And as soon as we get a little bit closer, she starts to look a little bit more realistic. Again, this is something you might, again, just group the person because it can be definitely in your benefit. And that's looking pretty good. She's starting to go in maybe around the object, maybe lift her up a little bit. Not too shabby. Let's see, another thing I can do is actually start to make a floor. Just because I have my vanishing points now. So I'm gonna set up a point. So again, what's nice about this is, once I've drawn in 2D, I can continue also in 2D. I don't have to like go model a floor and do it all over again. In fact, that would be silly, right? That would take a lot of time. But I could really start to make the floors and maybe even sort of a bounding box. Let's go with near again. Again, not the best tool, but definitely useful. And as you can see, definitely dangerous. Everything's near, so got to turn it off. Want that intersection or endpoint. And let's get the other one. Obviously, I'm trying to make sort of a square or a platform for the ground. And we'll take that one back. Sweet. I'd probably chop it up a little bit, but as you guys know, it really starts to ground the piece. Now, we don't actually have a site for our piece, so that's not super apparent, or required, I should say. But we can start to add trees, foreground, lots of different things to make this a slightly different drawing, right? We can start to add that context. And again, I don't mean colored trees, right? Almost like drafted trees, which again could either be drawn by yourself, quite literally, or there are, of course, trees. So plenty of those as well. You're welcome to support him. Wow, it's gotten really expensive. It used to be like $5. Obviously getting more popular. Not a bad business idea, to be honest. The site has changed over. But all he does is literally take a tree into Illustrator, trace it, and sell it. It's genius. I wish I thought of it. But definitely not a bad resource. However, that's definitely what I wanted to talk about today in terms of at least the extra stuff that you would need to do to a model to, of course, start to bring it back to this analog style, right? Something, of course, that helps is those construction lines, things that indicate to the observer that this was constructed, right? And it definitely does when you start to see the horizon line and those construction lines literally going to the drawing. So definitely a plus. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is composing this. So we do need this to scale, and well, I'm going to base it off of the floor plans that need to be at 1/4 scale, right? Because I can always make 2D and size something down by 50% to make it 1/8 scale, right? So I might have to use a little bit of math here, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and do 24 by 4, or 24 times 4, which should be 96, correct? I think so. I'm going to go with 96 feet. And 36 times 4, I'm going to need a calculator for that one. And it's funny, in the 90s they told us we were never going to have a calculator in our pocket. Lied to me. 144. But I wanted to make a 24 by 36 piece of paper at 1/4 scale. I've gone over this before, but as you can see, that is the easiest way to do it. I mean, it's done, and I don't have to scale my model, and I can keep it the same always, right? At least for Monday, this is really all I need. And definitely want to start talking about the line weights and things, or things that you guys might want to add, right, in terms of scale figures, trees, context, all kinds of stuff. And of course, that applies to any of the guys drawing it in 2D as well. You can still put trees. Nobody said you had to draw it by hand. Again, however, if you're ambitious, you're welcome to drag a tree picture in there too and trace it, right? If you're like Professor Tunks, he literally has kept them since he was in school. Right, and in fact, he has all of his watercolors. He's the one who actually got me started in taking pictures of textures, because I do a lot of rendering. So when I find a building that has some really cool brick, I make sure to take a really nice flat shot of it with almost no shadows, so I can use it on my renderings and have real stuff, and so I don't have to pay for it. Where was I? Composition. So we have our 24 by 36. As you guys know, you are allowed 2 of them, so I'm going to make a copy. And to be fair, you can do some pretty cool stuff with this. So I wanted to allow this just because I know we all have kind of different designs. Don't get me wrong, I mean, an observation tower lends itself to be in a portrait mode. I think that kind of makes sense, especially if you kind of do one big drawing and then a bunch of little drawings. You may have actually seen that I gave a student example of this exact same project the first time that I did it. We did a house instead of an observation tower. And let me tell you, that was really awful. Nobody knows how to draw a house, and that's okay. Observation towers seem to be a little bit easier, right? Just had to worry about stairs, maybe some structure, but it was a pretty good example. He has his axonometric to the left with his 3 floor plans sort of embedded also into that 1-point perspective, along with the elevation with some shade and shadow. And to be honest, I can't remember what the top right part was, but it was a really nice piece. And those are actually 2 24 by 36s. They were ginormous. Also a reason why I jumped into scales and making that a requirement. So I just wanted to point out that you can do a couple things with it. So don't get me wrong, I like the portrait mode. I think it works well, but you're more than welcome to kind of do what this student did here. We can change it to 90. I think it'd be kind of silly if we do both. I mean, you'd have to have a pretty good argument to do so. I'm not really against it. After all, the final is going to be a PDF. But keep in mind, we can plan for this stuff in the beginning, right? We can sort of plan that the pieces of paper are going to be right up next to each other, and that might be part of the plan. Maybe I literally want them exactly 1 inch apart from each other. Well, I'll need to do 1 inch times 4, so I'll do 4 inches. Actually, it'd be 4 feet. My bad, we're in feet. So 1 inch would be, of course, 4 feet. That's looking much more correct, but I can, again, plan for that ahead of time. And the reason I would is, well, what if I want a drawing to go across the page? Obviously, I'm going to copy this. You know, if I wanted something like that, that might not be the best way to put a gap in there. I'm going to be missing 1 inch of my drawing, right? Whereas, well, with 2 sheets of paper here, and as long as I put those 2 sheets of paper together, I can line them up really nice. Again, something that we probably might already know and seems pretty obvious. I just want to show that we can plan for those things, and we can plan for all 6 of your ideas in one single file, right? It doesn't have to be 6 pieces of paper, things like that. And we can stare at them both at the same time and sort of decide which one we want to go with, which I think is a pretty smart way of using a design tool like this. Anyway, I'm going to make a copy of this because, well, I don't want to do that all over again. So I'll make a copy so I don't accidentally mess it up. And I'm going to change the scale but not the proportion, so I'll hold shift. And you'll see actually on your final requirements, there's no scale requirement for the final drawing, right? However, you know, I'm a firm believer in the money shot, so go big or go home, right? Again, I like the asymmetrical quality, so I don't know, maybe my process is here, title, so I can start to actually put those things. And again, these are really more like placeholders. Again, you can double click on them, change their fonts, everything like that. Some fonts don't load in Rhino, and it's kind of annoying. It comes up like a bunch of weird rectangle squares. There's probably something to it, but again, Illustrator works, so I use them as placeholders. So title, world's smallest title. Sweet. World's largest title. Somewhere in between, still probably way too big. Getting closer, that's about right. Obviously I'd have my other drawings. So what if I have that actually in another file? I haven't shown you guys this. So maybe open recent. Let's get, obviously it's not gonna make any sense. I could do a section plane. I don't want to get into that. If you know how to do it, you know how to do it. Ask somebody who does. But realistically, you should be drawing your floor plans anyway, right? If you know some of the secrets, ask around. But yeah, you can section cut a model. But I'm not going to go over that today. That's really more computer graphics. However, I do want to get some of my floor plans or just, you know, kind of stuff so that I can show you how else to compose this. Obviously, you don't want to show the same thing over and over again like I'm doing right now. But we could start to compose this here, right? That way we can align some things. Like, you know, for instance, maybe I want my floor plans to be perfectly on the center of the page. Well, don't just guess. make it the perfect center, right? And so maybe that's my first floor, or sorry, maybe my last floor. Again, for the sake of tutorial, maybe it's something like that. Have all 3 floors. Maybe I got to get an elevation involved. I'm just going to draw a rectangle for today. Maybe it's something that starts to maybe line up. I know a lot of us are drawing our 2-point perspectives by hand or analogically. So it might be kind of nice to have this part. And maybe all these are really light lines. Obviously, I'm going to fake it till I make it to kind of just, you know, make things look a little bit more realistic of what you're looking at, right? If you guys check out Guadalupe, she's got like thousands of lines. It's beautiful. Can't wait to see those all become wonderful, thin, light construction lines. Please don't delete them. Right, but we start to get somewhere. We can start to compose this, and we have a lot of space to work with. But the main point that I wanted to get across today is it's much easier to do this in Rhino, right? Instead of trying to manipulate drawings or change them or change their size or things like that, or keep them in scale, which is of course important for those floor plans, the elevations and sections. Maybe my 1 point goes over here. Probably would have been a good idea. You know what? Let's go for the 1 point. It's so easy. Let's get the camera. Let's get it in there. Why not? I mean, we already set it up in the beginning. And then we'll get it into Illustrator to go over just a few things. Again, I can dial it in ever so nicely, especially if I knew this model a little bit better. Funny, actually this happened today. I ran into a student who was one of my old students 2 years ago, and he got hired and is working on the CAC building. Told me that it won't be done until 2026, which ever so exciting. Anyway, thought it was really interesting though. He thanked me and said, "You were absolutely right about everything." I don't know what he actually meant, but he said, "I'm glad you told me to never worry about money. I'm well off now." And he was kind of that guy who was in and out of his car and, working at HEB, doing different things, and it was really nice to see that he's doing very well. So yeah, literally 2 years ago, right through UTSA, 2 years, already has a job, 70 a year, done. All right, got some nice responsibility, and to be honest, work life is, I would say, easier than school life. School life's hard because we're putting you to the test. We want the best of the best, right? That's looking pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and save it. It's not as good as I think as our first 1 point, but hey, not too bad. But I just want to kind of get the point across that you can kind of manipulate these drawings to mend with each other. It's okay if the floor plan kind of goes over maybe one of the perspectives or something like that is indicated on the sheet itself. How are we on time? About 9 more minutes, 12, 15 more minutes max. Got a 1 point perspective in there. Let's take it. Let's get out of there. Double click on my 1 point. Again, I could test some things, but let's go ahead and highlight it all. Double click and make 2D. Not 2E, that'd be insane. And should get something calculated fairly quick-ish. Sorta. There we go. As you can see, it's pretty big. And thank goodness we grouped it. Not bad. Can you imagine if I had to calculate that by hand? I'd be here for days. So obviously, again, a huge benefit to this tool. However, I'm not really digging the square. Can I change it? Heck yeah. Change it to a circle. Why not? Of course, from here, I'll want to trim it. So I'll trim out basically everything outside of the object. This can actually get pretty annoying and tricky. Some lines, if they're not touching that circle, they just won't trim. So you just end up having to delete them anyway. But as you can see, we just go around the circle. And if anything is, of course, going through that circle, it'll be trimmed right off. Fortunately, there's not just kind of a one sort of click thing. I'm trying, right? it would be great if somebody down in head Q would be like, hey, people want something that just cuts out everything outside of an object. Can't we make that an option? It would be nice. But as you can see, you can click on these all day. If they're not touching, it won't cut it. In our case, that will, and it got it. I try to get big swoops, but as you know, if it doesn't touch, it won't work. It actually tells us what is touching and what we can delete. But again, just kind of want to throw out there that, you know, just because it comes up with a square doesn't even mean it has to stay a square. We can still do the same things that we imagine or want to do in an analog just as easily, if not even better or easier, in the digital realm. Alright, that's looking pretty good. Enter. And lastly, just take whatever I didn't use. Oh, it's grouped. That's why. Ungroup. Yeah, so group sometimes works on commands, sometimes trim, sometimes extend. However, it's not a guarantee. So I'd probably want to trim again because there's probably actually a lot of lines I missed now that the group is undone. But not too bad. Yeah, as you can see, I'm accidentally deleting some of the hidden lines that I should have kept, but it was because they were grouped at first. Be careful. Do as I say, not as I do. Actually, I kind of like those kind of sticking out like that. It's kind of cool. I don't know. I'm a huge fan of the anomaly. I had this master class where one of the architect professors, we basically made digital art, right? And it was all based on the glitch. So we would like put magnets on TV screens and make these weird anomalies, stuff that you couldn't actually produce in a digital realm, but was very digital. So I don't know. I kind of have a philosophy when it comes to digital realm, is that more disorder actually makes it look more lifelike. So maybe life is actually made up of constant disorder, and really the trick is finding the beauty in it. I don't know, trying to get deep on a Thursday, but obviously trying to make some small talk, as this process can take a little while. But for good reason. Now we have a nice little crop for our pieces. I'd probably go the other way, but I don't want to accidentally get that. And again, nice little anomalies. That's looking pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and move it. Again, I kind of like this if it sort of comes out of the page in sort of this graphic kind of style. Again, I didn't really plan for that, and kind of my philosophy. The mistake in the digital realm is sometimes a good thing. Oh, that's my camera. I was like, what is that? Let's turn my camera off. Hide. There we go. But yeah, we can do something with this as well. Before we, again, imagine doing this in Illustrator, it would have froze right there. Just scaling it, right? Obviously that's pretty close to my drawing. Probably don't want it that big. And obviously I still want room for maybe those two elevations, so maybe a section here and maybe a section over there, or maybe even a section on the other side. Not a big deal. And I'll go ahead and put my 1 point there, right? Definitely composed, at least for the sake of argument. And well, let's put those pieces of paper together. That was kind of just to show you that you can move them. In my case, I'm going to want them butted right up next to each other. Kind of going for that full board look. Again, not something that you have to do. It's just a little easier for today. I'd still probably want to trim my lines. I'm just kind of OCD like that. Honestly, if they're not in the page, they won't show up, which is nice. But again, I'm a little OCD about it, so I always trim them off. But that's looking pretty good. Let's say I was done and ready to just change some line weights, right? So of course, just like every other tutorial that we've practically done, highlight everything, file export selected. And of course, depending on your settings, you'll either choose a DWG or an AI model. In my case, I'm going to go with the DWG. It's a little bit more forgiving with the layers, and I notice all the lines are there, so not bad. Go ahead and put it on my desktop for accessibility. Call it part 4, enter. Usually you can do default. As I mentioned before, just choosing the youngest year is usually kind of the easiest, or sorry, oldest year, I guess I should say. Smallest number. And sweet, we got it. Obviously running 2 rhinos at the same time is definitely not a good idea. And let's go ahead and open that. So really just one last thing that I don't know if I actually went over this or not in Illustrator yet, so we'll do it today. So we're gonna go ahead and take that part 4. As you can see, we can scale to fit artboard. Doesn't really matter because I know what I need is two 24 by 36. Don't get me wrong, we could scale it. I mean, there's all kinds of things we can do. But as you can see, it really maintained the layers, and my goodness, very well done. A lot of layers there. That's looking pretty good. Of course, we've added some layers, so of course that was added to it as well. And as you can see, just zooming out with this many lines in Illustrator can be sometimes detrimental for the computer. So be aware that these desktop computers might be your friend in that regard. But let's set up our pages first. Let's go ahead and make them. So I'm going to go to File, Document Setup. I'm going to go to Edit Artboards. I don't know if I went over this. Again, I kind of do it every semester, so kind of lose track, to be completely honest. But let's go ahead and change those from pixels to inches. So I'm going to go with 24 inches. I guess that's inches. We'll have to put it back into a non-pixelated format. That's looking pretty correct. However, let's go ahead and do Command R or Control R. And I'm going to right click on this little box right here and switch it to inches. Again, I don't know if I told you guys that yet. But now we have a 24 by 36, and I'm going to double check it before I go ahead and make another one. And as you can see, just highlighting your lines can be detrimental to your CPU. So again, another main reason why I do everything in Rhino first. Plus I'm recording, so yeah, that's probably taking a lot. You might not actually run into the same issues. Some of you guys have great computers, so shouldn't be too bad. Let's go ahead and get another one of these. I can hold Option and just kind of highlight another one. In my case, it's gonna copy the lines too, and I definitely don't want that. In fact, I'm not even clicking anymore. It's just kind of like, hey, previous command. Anyway, a lot easier is to just kind of draw in the space itself. Oh, again, very detrimental. What's kind of nice is at least it kind of stays together. Anyway, I'm gonna line those up, and you shouldn't have a problem as long as you don't touch your lines. Kind of draw any box, because of course you can change it from up here. 24 by 36, and that looks about right, but I'm gonna double check. Sweet. And this is where you can actually bud them together as well. Oops. And get those a little closer. In fact, a little line will come up indicating that they are touching. I can hold spacebar as well to sort of pan or sort of move around. Lastly, I just need to get this into the right spot and change the line weight. And thank goodness, right? I mean, you can group things, especially at this point, because they are all layered. It does take a while to group stuff, but it should actually run a little bit quicker too. Spoke too soon. I wonder if I stop my recording if it'll work a little bit better. But anyway, let's go for broke. We don't have much to do left, so let's just get in the right spot. Give me a preview. Okay, or not. I didn't want a preview anyway. But yeah, as you can see, literally the exact same lines don't quite read the same way. Let's try and scale it. So I'm gonna hold shift. Much easier. Yeah, for some reason it doesn't have a hard time scaling the line, just moving it, right? Then again, could be my problem, not yours. So, however, as long as we did everything correctly, it should line up just right. And we're just about right in the width. Now we're going to use my arrow key to slightly take it down. Of course, it's going to freeze for each and every one of those arrow movements, but hopefully this is enough to get started, right? In terms of seeing the potential of possibly how to lay these out together. Is that somewhat familiar to computer graphics? Does he have you guys do it kind of the same way? All in Rhino? Line weights, everything like that? Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the best way to do it. Is that what Longoria does? Good, yeah. It's pretty universal, right? Most of the time you're not recording and stuff like that. Also, I should have been aware Allegro was going to have every single thing beautifully organized. And I'd imagine she has a computer to, of course, handle that. So, not usually a big deal. Sometimes we actually design to our computer's limitations as well. I know I used to for sure. But good. Any questions, guys, in terms of composition, how to get it together? Again, the shade and shadow is on part 3. So if you did have questions about that, I'd be glad to go over it again or go over something new. What do you got? Anything? Tiredness of a long week? Sounds good. Let's end it there.